She just wanted her blood pressure medication. That's all. But when Maria Johnson walks into a pharmacy after her nursing shift, everything spirals into a nightmare. The white pharmacist looks at her black skin and decides something's wrong with her prescription. Police are called. 2 officers arrive, already judging her guilty. They don't check her ID. They don't verify her story. They just grab her, cuff her, and parade her through the store like a criminal. What these cops don't know, Maria's father is a retired FBI legend who specialized in bringing down corrupt officers, and the storm he's about to unleash will burn their entire department to the ground. Maria Johnson's feet ached. 30 years as a nurse had taught her how to ignore pain, how to push through exhaustion. 12-hour shifts in the ICU hadn't broken her yet, but tonight her body screamed for rest. All she needed was her medication. Simple. Routine. She'd been picking up the same prescription from this same Georgia pharmacy for years. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in a sickly glow. The teenage clerk barely looked up when Maria handed over her ID, insurance card, and doctor's slip for her blood pressure pills. The boy frowned at his screen, then whispered something to his manager, a pinch-faced white woman with hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. The manager glanced at Maria, then back at the screen. Her lips tightened. Maria felt it immediately, the shift in the air, the invisible weight pressing down. Every black person knew this feeling, when suspicion enters the room before a single word is spoken. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's an issue with your prescription," the manager said, voice dripping fake sweetness. "Issue? I've picked up this same medication here for years." Maria kept her voice calm. 30 years in emergency rooms had taught her not to escalate tense situations. "The account details don't match. We've contacted authorities to investigate." Maria's spine stiffened. Authorities? For what? But the manager had already stepped back, chin lifted with that look people get when they've decided you're guilty. Outside, sirens wailed, growing louder. Maria could have left, could have walked out, but that would have looked like guilt, and she had done nothing wrong. Minutes later, 2 white officers pushed through the door. Officer Brady, tall with a buzz cut and permanent sneer, didn't even check her ID or the computer. He just stepped toward Maria like a predator circling wounded prey. "Ma'am, I need you to step outside," he said, voice thick with condescension. "I haven't done anything wrong." Maria stood tall. The younger officer, Jenkins, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The manager folded her arms, watching with smug satisfaction. Brady's hand moved to his belt. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Other customers stared. A mother grabbed her child's hand and hurried away. A man near the cold medicine aisle started recording with his phone. Brady grabbed Maria's wrist, metal handcuffs biting into her skin. Gas rippled through the pharmacy. Maria didn't fight. Fighting would give them the excuse they wanted. She allowed herself to be led out, head high, even as humiliation burned through her chest. After 3 decades saving lives, working through pandemics, comforting the dying, this was how she was treated. Like a criminal, like a danger, because of her skin color. They shoved her into the back of the squad car. Before the door slammed, Maria looked Brady straight in the eyes and said in a voice steady as steel, "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." The ride to the station was silent. Maria sat stiffly, handcuffs cutting into her wrists. The officers talked quietly up front like she wasn't even there, just a package they'd picked up. "Another fraud case," Brady chuckled. "What is it with these people thinking they can just walk in and take whatever they want?" Jenkins mumbled something back, less certain but not disagreeing. At the rundown precinct, officers stood around sipping coffee, pretending not to stare but staring anyway. Inside, the walls were sickly off-white, the floor scuffed and stained. The smell of cheap disinfectant and stale coffee filled the air. They led her to booking. Brady filled out a form, scribbling lazily. Name, Maria Johnson. Age, 58. Race, Black. Maria thought bitterly that the last box was the only one they'd cared about tonight. "Suspected prescription fraud," Brady announced loudly. "Caught red-handed at the pharmacy." The desk sergeant barely looked at her before shrugging. Another black woman, another statistic, another night. They took her mugshot, flash bright, blinding, then fingerprinted her, pressing her sore wrists roughly against the ink pad. Afterward, they walked her toward the holding cells, each step slow and deliberate. As they passed through the station, she caught snippets of conversation. What's she in for? Fraud, I think. Figures. Every comment stung, not because she believed them, but because she knew how easily lies became truth in the minds of people who didn't want to know better. They shoved her into a cell, bare metal bench bolted to the wall, and slammed the door with a clang that echoed down the hallway. Brady leaned against the bars, smirking. Want to tell us the real story now? Might go easier if you come clean. Maria met his gaze unflinching. The real story is you're going to regret tonight. Jenkins snorted. Yeah, sure, you got a magic lawyer hiding in your purse? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. They walked away, boots thudding against the floor, leaving her alone with humming lights and the smell of bleach. Maria sat still for a long moment, breathing slow and measured. Then she turned her wrists, studying the red welts the cuffs had left. Evidence not just of what they'd done tonight, but what they'd always been willing to do when they thought no one would call them out. The station clock ticked loudly. 9:42 p.m. It wouldn't be long now. She knew Raymond was already moving. Her father wasn't a man who wasted time. Out in the hallway, voices rose. First low, then louder, the sharp crack of a desk being slapped. What do you mean somebody's calling from D.C. at this hour? Brady shouted. Maria smiled slightly to herself. She recognized that tone, the bravado of a man who'd stepped into quicksand but still thought he could walk out. The phone rang again. An officer answered, his voice suddenly tight. Yes, sir. She's here. Yes, sir. Right away. Maria leaned back against the cold concrete wall and closed her eyes briefly. It had begun. They thought they were dealing with another tired black woman, too exhausted to fight back. But what they'd actually done was light a match over a pool of gasoline, and now the fire was coming for them. The minutes dragged like hours inside that holding cell. Maria sat upright on the cold metal bench, her hands resting carefully in her lap. She refused to slouch, refused to show anything that looked like defeat. If they wanted to humiliate her, they'd have to work harder than this. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, sometimes heavy boots stomping with purpose, sometimes lazy shuffles of officers killing time. None stopped at her cell. None even glanced her way. In their minds, she was already categorized and forgotten. Another case number, another woman who didn't matter. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed and flickered, throwing jerky shadows across gray walls. A phone rang sharply down the hall, quickly answered and cut off. The tension in the building had shifted. Maria felt it like a pressure change before a storm. Officer Brady swaggered back down the hallway, pretending he wasn't rattled. His smirk was thinner now, like a cracked mask barely holding together. He stopped outside her cell, tapping the metal bars with his knuckles. "How you holding up in there, Grandma?" he drawled. Maria tilted her head slightly, studying him. He wanted a reaction. He needed it. She stayed silent. Brady shrugged, pretending it didn't bother him. "You know, we could have cut you loose with just a warning, but now you're looking at real charges. Attempted fraud. Maybe even resisting arrest if we get creative." He grinned wider, but his eyes darted toward the front desk, where officers were whispering more urgently than before. Maria allowed herself a small smile. "You don't even realize it yet, do you?" "Realize what?" Brady's grin faltered. "That the walls are already closing in." Before he could answer, the door to the front of the station banged open, hard enough that even from the holding cells, Maria could hear it. A different kind of silence swept through the building, a silence full of held breath and darting glances. Maria stayed perfectly still. She didn't need to see him to know who had just walked in. Raymond Johnson, her father. The retired FBI legend, whose name still made certain people in law enforcement sit straighter, speak more carefully. The man who had spent decades pulling corrupt officers out of their safe corners and shining a blinding light into their darkness. And now he was here for her. Low voices murmured at the front desk. A few yes sirs hurriedly spoken. A few officers scattering like leaves in the wind. Footsteps slow, deliberate, moved toward the back of the station. Officer Jenkins appeared first, peeking around the corner toward the holding cells. His face was pale, mouth drawn into a thin, nervous line. He whispered something to Brady, urgent and panicked. Brady snapped at him under his breath, but Maria could see it now. The crack spreading through his bravado, the realization beginning to dawn. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how bad it was going to get. Two men in dark suits and earpieces followed Jenkins down the hall. Federal agents, not local cops, not rent-a-cops, the real deal. Behind them walked Raymond Johnson. He hadn't changed much since retirement. Maybe a few more lines on his face, a little more silver in his closely cropped hair, but his back was still straight, his eyes still sharp, and his presence still filled a room like a storm fills the sky. Slow, inevitable, impossible to ignore. He didn't look at the officers. He looked straight at Maria. When their eyes met, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. "I'm here. You're not alone. Not this time." Raymond turned his gaze to Brady. The effect was immediate. Brady straightened up like he was back in boot camp, his face flushing an angry, defensive red. "Who's in charge here?" Raymond's voice was calm, deadly calm. The desk sergeant stumbled forward. "That would be me, sir." Raymond didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Good, then you'll want to explain why a licensed nurse with valid identification and no criminal record is sitting in a holding cell tonight." The sergeant opened his mouth, closed it. Sweat beaded at his temples. Raymond continued, voice even and merciless. "You'll want to explain why your officers detained her without verifying an error, why they ignored clear evidence of her identity, why they physically restrained her in public without probable cause." He took a slow step closer. "And you'll want to explain it very carefully, because as of 10 minutes ago, you're not just dealing with local fallout. You're dealing with a federal civil rights violation, and the Department of Justice is already on the line." Maria watched as Brady's face turned from red to almost gray, his jaw clenched tight. Raymond glanced at the agents beside him. "Unlock the cell." One agent produced keys and moved to the door. Brady finally found his voice. "You can't just walk in here and—" Raymond turned his head slightly, fixing him with a look that could have frozen fire. "I already have." The cell door swung open with a soft metallic creak. Raymond stepped forward and offered his hand to Maria. She rose slowly, every movement measured, every muscle screaming for dignity. She didn't touch him right away. Instead, she stood on her own feet, back straight, shoulders squared. Then she nodded once. Raymond smiled, just barely, and stepped aside so she could walk out first. As she passed Brady, she didn't spare him a glance, but she saw the way his hands fisted at his sides, the way his throat bobbed when he swallowed hard. He knew. Finally he knew. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. And for the first time that night, Maria allowed herself to exhale, a slow, steady breath that tasted like victory just starting to bloom. As Maria stepped out of the cell, the entire station shifted around her. Officers who had been standing casually moments ago suddenly found fascinating reasons to look anywhere but at her. The ones who had laughed, who had whispered, all of them stiffened, their postures tight, their faces carefully blank. Raymond walked just a step behind her, not crowding, not pushing, just there, a silent wall of authority at her back. The two federal agents flanked them, making it crystal clear that this was no polite request. This was a reckoning walking through their halls, one deliberate step at a time. At the front desk, the sergeant shifted nervously, wiping sweat from his forehead. Officer Jenkins hovered nearby, shoulders hunched, looking like a man waiting for a verdict he already knew was coming. The desk phone started ringing, sharp, insistent, demanding. The sergeant hesitated, hand hovering over the receiver like it might bite him. "Answer it," Raymond said quietly. The sergeant picked up with trembling fingers. "Savannah PD." He listened for maybe 2 seconds before his face turned a sickly shade of gray. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." He held the phone out toward Raymond. It's for you." Raymond took the receiver with the kind of calm you can't fake. "This is Johnson." There was a beat of silence, then Raymond smiled, a small, cold smile that sent a ripple through the room. "Good, proceed." He hung up without another word and handed the phone back to the stunned sergeant like it was nothing. Maria raised an eyebrow. "What did you just set in motion?" Raymond leaned in just slightly. "You remember the civil rights unit I helped build before I retired? They've been looking for a case to make an example out of." He paused. "Looks like they just found it." Before Maria could respond, the station door burst open again, this time with the hard, clattering rhythm of people moving with purpose. More federal agents, at least 6, spread out through the station like they'd trained for this moment 100 times. One agent handed a thick folder to the desk sergeant. "This station is now under immediate federal audit pending civil rights violations." A gasp rippled through the officers. Brady took a half step forward, face darkening. "You can't do that! This is a local matter." Raymond turned to face him, voice calm, almost amused. "You should read the fine print on your badge, officer. Local authority doesn't override federal law." Maria and Raymond walked toward the exit. They didn't rush. Each step was a message. We are not powerless. We are not invisible. And you will answer for what you've done. As Maria stepped into the humid Georgia night, free at last, she knew this was only the beginning, but for once, the battle ahead didn't feel hopeless. Because tonight, justice wasn't just a dream. It was a storm, and it had just arrived. What do you think? If you've made it this far, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. Have you ever stood up against injustice? What would you have done in Maria's situation?